reason. They didn't have anything, they didn't care about him being the savior of the world. They never even thought about anything like that. Now, after the death of Jesus, assassination of Jesus, the movement which he helped to perpetuate it had already been started, but he really carried it to the fore. It was called the Nazarene Party. There was no such thing as Christianity when Jesus was alive. Even in the book of Acts, it tells you they were first called Christians in Antioch. This is well after the death of Jesus. This is when the Apostle Paul and Barnabas goes there, that they are called Christians. Now, here it was called the Nazarene Party. And one of the main contingents of that party was the Zealot contingent. They were the fighters, the soldiers who fought against the Romans and led all kind of insurrections against them. And he had several of them among his disciples. So what he was trying to develop was what we would call today a black united front. Because we find in the Nazarene Party, if you read your New Testament very carefully, you'll find in the Nazarene Party that you had members from the Pharisee Party, from the Sadducee Party, from the Zealot Party, and from the Essenes. He was covering all bases. So he had a united front there. Now, after his death, for a while it brought confusion. And then Peter and James and John took over the leadership and stirred up the masses once again. Then they were in turn killed. They say Peter was crucified upside down, and others were, most of the apostles met with some type of martyrdom. Well, after this now, the struggle goes on for independence of Israel. There's another person comes along whom they would call in the Latin language Jesus, another Yeshua, and this is Yeshua ben, let me make sure I got him right. Is this Ben Elia ben Kakba? Yeshua ben Kakba is the next one to come along and to lead a revolution as a Messiah. See, we think there was only one man named Jesus or Yeshua. But in Jesus' day himself, when he was a little boy at 12 years old, there was Yeshua, or as we would say, Jesus ben Judah, who had led a revolution and was crucified. And when Jesus was 12 years old, to get home in Nazareth, he had to walk up a road through several thousand crosses of Israelites hanging on the cross, and at the head of it was one whom you would call in the day's language Jesus, son of Judah. So he had that experience at 12. He himself had the experience, Jesus, son of Joseph, just using the Latin language now. And then after him, there is Jesus ben Kakaba, who leads a revolution. Then there's Jesus ben Menachem, who leads another one, and which goes now, Jesus, the one that we talk about, is crucified about 30 of the Common Era. They assassinate him. The movement is still going on and continues to build. The Nazarene Party continues to build. And I'll tell you where you can get good information on this. Dr. Hugh J. Schoenfield. He's a Jewish writer. He does a very good job on it. 2 books, 3 as a matter of fact, and they are The Passover Plot, The Incredible Christians, and The Jesus Party. Those are essential books for having an understanding of what was going on historically. Now, he doesn't put it in an African-centered context. We have to do that. But he gives you a good historical overview of what was taking place. We try to detach Jesus of the Bible from history, and you can't do that because he was a part of that history. The same as that people would come along later and try to detach Dr. King from the history and the movement that was going on in our time, or carrying on our time, or to separate Malcolm, to just take his philosophy and separate him from the actual movement that was going on. You couldn't do that logically. But when the European Christians took over, which we're going to get to in a minute, they were able to do it by force of arms. Now, a groundswell arose until by 66 of the Common Era, the Romans said, we tired of these black folks down there in Israel constantly rebelling. We got to stop this once and for all. It's getting out of hand. So Titus brought his troops into Palestine to attack Jerusalem. He was called back by, was it Vespasian? I'm trying to think of the name of the emperor at that time. He was called back to Rome. So he stopped short. He had laid siege to Jerusalem, but he stopped short of conquering it. And at that time, the Nazarenes and the Zealots thought that they had the upper hand. And they were chasing the Romans out of the land. So they thought they had won. So for 4 years, they thought it was all over. We're getting rid of these Romans. The Romans come back in 70 under Titus. And this time when they come back in full force. And they come back with the baddest legion in the Roman army. Unfortunately, Africans, the 10th legion, called the leopard men. They used Africans to conquer African people. That's exactly what they did, a methodology used by Europeans all the time. They burned down the city, totally destroyed. I mean, they laid it to siege. Over 100,000 people died. Where blood flowed as high as a horse's halter in the streets, they said. People were eating each other by the end of it. Many of them did escape. Most of them went back to Africa, the origin where they came from. Some went up into Europe and became the later known Jews. Many went up into India and became the Khazars, what they call the 13th tribe. Those that went into Europe became the Ashkenazi and hooked up with the Germans. They were African when they got there, but after much admixture, they were more German than they were African. Now, at this time, the Romans are totally dominating the land. The capital of the Israelites is just burned down. Not one brick is left upon another. It's burn it down to the ground. That's all there is to it. It is not even considered the Holy Land at that time. Those Hebrews that are of the diaspora, they look to it. They look to their homeland there, especially the ones who are in Egypt. And that's where a lot of your gospel writing goes on then, those who settled in Egypt. At this time, there's still no Christian movement. You still have Nazarenes continue to fight even up until 135 of this era, and the Romans only finally stopped this movement almost totally at Masada in 135, yes, at the fort built by Herod. After that, Palestine is nothing in the eyes of the world. Christianity is focused now in Rome because the Roman, well first, no, let me correct that. It is at this time focused in Africa, where the original Christian churches developed. In Carthage, which they call Carthage, and in Alexandria, and then down in Ethiopia. That is where your Christian powers and your church fathers and your saints at that time are Tertullian, who brought made the Latin language the language of the church, Latin language which actually was mostly Punic at that time, an African language, which Hannibal the Great spoke. And after him came Augustine. Origen came after him. Cipriani, Augustine, Perpetua, all of these were Africans there who were the bishops of the church. Now, you had some churches in Rome, and the Romans were here and there, but the strength of the church, the African church, still maintaining its African consciousness and culture, is in Africa. Not having the political force it had as the Nazarene party, because it had to start playing a lot of that down to keep those Romans from beating up on them. But they are strong. They're going strong until the Romans decide that it is just too costly to keep taking them to the Colosseum and feeding them to lions and to keep killing them. There's only one way to deal with this thing. And this happens now in about 311 of the Common Era. Constantine the Great, they call him. His mother, I'm trying to think of his mother's name. It's not Monica. I'm trying to think of his mother's name. It doesn't come to me. Is converted to Christianity. And she says, you got to stop killing these people. You got to stop killing. By this time, it has been Europeanized and everything. It's using a lot of its Africanness and its original meaning.